to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas and the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Buford Terrell, Professor of Law at South Texas College of Law, welcoming you all here tonight on an evening when I'm sure many of us would rather be in St. Louis following the Astros, but we've got some things that are important tonight, too. The top of the business tonight, I think, is to check in and see what the news from the world of drugs is with our reliable correspondent, Dean. Hello, Dean. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Buford. It's always good to talk with you guys. A lot of stuff I want to report on this week. The numbers just came out. It was 770,000 plus marijuana users arrested last year here in the United States. And this is despite the news that of recent days that it helps shrink tumors, and a report that was just issued yesterday or the day before that proves that it causes less damage to the lungs than does tobacco. I want to invite folks to tune into my website. I just have a couple of new shows online. I put them up in advance because I'm headed to Hartford for a drug conference up there this weekend. But the guests for this week are Phil Smith. You may know him for the corrupt cop stories he normally does. But he just made a trip to Afghanistan, and he's going to give us a full report on what happened on that trip and talk about the opium that's just prevalent. 90% of the world's supply now coming from there. The Cultural Baggage Show features Dr. Stanton Field. Now, he's the author of 7 Tools to Beat Addiction, but he's also has a statement to make in regards to the government's attack on doctors who prescribe pain medication. And this is becoming a real atrocity, if you will. Many doctors are being set up by agents of the DEA just as if they were some type of street corner vendor. The agents come in, know just what to say to convince the doctor that they need the pain pills, and then they come back and bust them for having given them the pills. But this drug conference in Hartford, it's being sponsored by Aetna Insurance, by Trinity College, and by the city of Hartford itself. And it's being produced, if you will, by Mr. Cliff Thornton of efficacy-online.org. And this is a chance for health professionals, retired law enforcement officers like your guest tonight, Warden Watkins, who are members of L.E.A.P, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and they get a chance to have a discussion, a debate, if you will, with agents of the DEA and other law enforcement organizations. And I want to send a special shout-out to your guest, Warden Watkins. He is a bold, forthright individual, a member of L.E.A.P, and a gentleman who deserves all of the praise I can heap on him. He's spent his time in the trenches of the drug war and seen it to be a total, abject failure. And I want to invite folks to listen in on KPFT radio here in Houston. That's 90.1 FM. In Galveston, it's 89.5. And every afternoon at 4:20, still prohibited on Sunday, but at 4:20 in the afternoon, I provide you the 420 Drug War News. And on Fridays at 2 o'clock, we have the Century of Live program. This week it'll be with Phil Smith. And at 7 p.m., we have the Cultural Baggage Show, and again, it's Dr. Stanton Field. There is no truth, justice, logic, scientific fact, medical data. In fact, there is no reason whatsoever for the drug war to continue another second. I would urge folks to visit my new website. It has links to about 13 of the best drug reform organizations out there. And that new website is endprohibition.org. Buford, thank you for this time, sir.
Thanks, Dean. And before you go, with this conference you're going to in Hartford, do you see it as a helpful sign that now you're going to a conference that's sponsored by both a city and a large insurance company?
Yes, sir. I do find that it's hopefully a glimmer on the horizon that there is a a new day dawning. Lots of people across this country are fed up with this drug war. A lot of them have taken the time to educate themselves in this regard. And I think once that happens, you have an activist on your hands. And it's not, it no longer has the terrible stigma attached to discussing the subject. And I think we're on our way to a new day.
Okay. Thank you, Dean, and I hope our listeners tune in to you as well. I'd like to add a couple of things to what Dean has been telling us to bring you some drug news from the worlds of popular culture. First, Melissa Etheridge, the singer, this week came out in public to say that during her recent struggle against cancer, she was taking medical marijuana as an adjunct to her other therapies, and said also that all of her doctors had recommended it as the best available thing for the job. She now joins Montel Williams, who has become a very strong and public advocate for medical marijuana. Also in San Francisco, the criminal cases involving baseball and steroids and the Balco Corporation seem to be moving ahead much faster. This is a case in which, once again, we see some of the problems the government has in selecting some drugs for suppression and treating others as if they were a quite different substance. As Dean said, our guest tonight is one who has learned a lot about the criminal justice system and the drug laws the hard way by working as part of that system. He's Richard Watkins, warden at Huntsville, and a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It's good to have you back again with us, Richard.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Retired warden.
Retired warden, okay. Well, that's nice, too.
Yeah.
Before we get on to our subject tonight, though, something that I think is of real interest to a lot of us here in the viewing area, and this is with the recent experiences with Hurricane Rita, the evacuations through Houston and Huntsville. I was thinking you might have some things of interest to say about what happened as all of the Gulf Coast tried to go through your hometown.
Yeah. It was a real challenge, as anyone who traveled any of the major freeways during that period of time can attest to. That situation, I think, presented some real opportunities to recognize how unprepared we are for a lot of things. And also, during that period of time, it brought out the best in folks, and it also brought out the worst in folks. I'm very pleased to say that there were a number of shelters opened in Huntsville, in the Huntsville area, sponsored by various groups, church groups, organizations, that really provided sensitive care for those folks who were displaced. And the unfortunate thing also is that there was a big level of unpreparedness for those folks who were medically challenged, mentally challenged. We found that that sensitivity needs to be developed and plans need to be developed to take appropriate care of those folks. But overall, I'm very proud of most of Huntsvillians. They rolled out the red carpet. We had a number of people who stayed with us, and it was just an untold number of real human beings helping human beings stories that make you proud to be a human being sometimes.
Well, it must be a really overwhelming feeling to have over 1 million people from the Gulf Coast pouring into a medium-sized town with really not much warning.
Well, that's exactly right. the freeways is an example. We were blessed enough to be able to come and pick up my wife's parents and make a 3-hour trip back to Huntsville. But some guests that we had that followed just about 6 hours later took them 17 hours to get there. And the very sad thing is that we saw people who were just exhausted, people who cars they thought were in good shape until the stop-and-go traffic, children, elderly folks. It was just heartbreaking. And so, like with our main subject tonight, I think our nation is going to have to step up to the plate and take a realistic approach toward future disasters.
Well, I think also, like our main subject tonight, the two things that impressed me the most watching it from here in Houston were first the very good intentions and the actual desire to step in and help that was exhibited by most of the citizens. I mean, just watching the volunteers come together in Houston was one of those really heartwarming things to watch. And the second thing was that it looked like in most cases there was pretty good planning, organization, and forethought at the local level. The governors of Galveston, or the mayors of Galveston and Houston, the county judges knew what they were doing. But the further up the line you move through the state and federal level, the less competence, the less forethought came through. And I think we see the same thing in drug reform, is that the cities are catching on.
That's exactly right. There were a number of horror stories that I've been made aware of that took place during the devastations that the hurricanes have presented, that brought to the forefront the reality that exists and the lack of preparedness. And I think it has to be a concerted effort of this nation, because people who were evacuated, they went to other states, other facilities, not just to plan to get those folks there, but to take care of them after they're there and to get them back.
I was hearing one story this week of the residents of a nursing home. There was money available, there was planning available to move them out of state to another nursing home, but there seems no money or resources available to get them back home now.
That's right.
So really, there's a lot of planning that didn't take place.
Well, I think this is a wake-up call, and I think, like you appropriately said, that the mayors of Galveston and Houston did a wonderful job. I mean, my hat goes off to them, and that they were aware of a lot of things, and they took bold actions, and they were sensitive of things. But I think this has to be a national effort, a national planning process.
Yeah. We have a phone call. Caller, you're on the air.
First of all, just really quickly, I wanted to mention that one thing that I found really interesting about the hurricane is that it magnified everything. Anything that was good was 10 times better than it normally was, and any problem that we had was also multiplied and very quickly observable to everybody. I saw a short film here on this channel. I did not catch the name of it, about industrial hemp yesterday, and it was actually incredibly interesting. It featured James Woolsey, and the producer was Tin Roof. I don't know the name of it, but anyway, it was very well done. Now, this comes from somebody who, excluding medical marijuana, is opposed to legalization. Maybe, I'd be willing to look into decriminalization, but I'm just a little bit too worried that we would have things done to even things like marijuana that we've done to alcohol and tobacco, and that just makes me very fearful of that. But I'd love to hear any of your statements on any one of those things.
Okay, thank you, caller. I might say that as far as industrial hemp is concerned, For hundreds of years, that was one of the main products of this country. Hemp was the main source of rope in the days of the sailing navies, and in fact, the cloth, that's where, for canvas is the word cannabis, which we use for marijuana. And up into the 1940s, we grew hemp to be used for rope. The Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper. Until about the 1920s, our currency was printed on hemp paper because it lasts a long time. So yeah, there's and around the world now, industrial hemp is a good product. Ironically, in spite of what the government says, industrial hemp is probably one way to cut down on the amount of smoking marijuana, in that the way it's grown and with its being a very, very, very low THC plant, anytime marijuana would be grown outdoors, cross-fertilization would probably destroy the smoking qualities of the other marijuana. But, industrial hemp is probably well worth our spending an entire show on some night. I didn't see this particular film. One thing that I saw more about Katrina than Rita was a story that said of the evacuees from New Orleans, somewhere between 30 and 50% of them had some sort of substance dependency problem. Most of them, I'm sure, alcohol. But the thing is that the people that were being brought here from Louisiana were also the poorest of the poor. I just wonder if you had any comment about that.
Well, my wife and I worked the shelter where many of those folks came from. They actually came from the Superdome. And their explanation, I talked to a Vietnam veteran who just told me a story that broke my heart. First of all, they didn't get treated really well in the Astrodome. And what happened, based upon accounts from them, was that most of the good citizens who needed help didn't have transportation, and they had, as an example, this veteran had a sister that had major surgery the week before. So he didn't want to leave her. So what he did is he ended up going to the Superdome. But then there were other folks who went to the Superdome who didn't have transportation, didn't have money, didn't have places to go. But what happened, according to their accounts, is that when many of the substance abusers and outright criminals stayed behind to take advantage of the situation, but when the conditions worsened, these were some of the first folks that they evacuated and put them in the Superdome. So that's how many bad experiences took place with just good, downright citizens. That was other accounts of horrible stories that took place. But then there were some real shining heroes. There's this one police officer in New Orleans that refused to take an order and allowed a family to stay together. So, in spite of the officers that took off, there was some that stayed behind. And then there were, like we said earlier, there were some wonderful stories, and then there were some horrible stories as well.
Well, I think that brings out something else, too, is when we look at the New Orleans police force, what we find is that we're looking at a group of people. And it included some just absolute heroes and some just absolute villains as well. And as you said, a catastrophe this big kind of acts like a magnifying glass. And those heroes got their red capes, and those villains kind of showed themselves up too.
That's exactly right. As you very well know, New Orleans, like many larger cities, have been challenged in their law enforcement. The corruption is just a matter of record. But here again, the devastation that took place, like you said, it magnified the situation. And the good guys You know, they showed, and the bad guys, they took off. But you know, it's a concern that that kind of situation exists. There ought to be a way that you can, through a process, eliminate more of the bad guys. You know, but that's just not realistic. And unfortunately, that happens. And I hate to see the whole police force take a black eye because of that.
Well, we're going a little bit larger now. After a whole career in the criminal justice system, you became a member of L.E.A.P. Why?
Well, it was an opportunity for me because I felt for a long time that what we were doing was the definition of insanity. This state, this nation, this state in particular, because it's the largest prison system in the free world, kept locking up more people. And a majority of those folks were substance abusers. The so-called war on drugs, you know, it challenged the reasonable thought. You know, it just, you know, it was a facade. Over 21 years in the prison system, I had an opportunity to see that we kept locking up more and more people who, in my opinion, had no business being locked up. And when L.E.A.P came along, Law Enforcement Against the Prohibition, the light came on. It showed me that there was, you know, there were other people who felt the way I felt, and who recognized that if things don't change in this nation, you know, we're in really, really bad shape.
How large an organization is L.E.A.P now?
Well, L.E.A.P is growing. I'm not sure the most recent figures. The thing that's really wonderful is that it's growing in an area that is non-traditional. I mean, people in law enforcement, people in the criminal justice system. We have recent recruits, and we've done surveys of people in the criminal justice system, and nearly 80% of at least two surveys that I'm familiar with found that those folks who actually worked in those areas felt that prohibition was just not working.
Yeah, it surprised me in the time I've been doing this show, the number of law enforcement people that have come up to me and said, you know, I'm still working, I still have to make the arrest, I still can't say anything, but I agree with you most of the way. It's surprised me how often I get that response.
We have seen district attorneys, we've seen chiefs of police, we've seen supervisors in drug enforcement, we've seen sheriffs, we've seen folks in these areas admit that that prohibition of drugs is not working. And they really want to be in a position to see some change. Yeah. And I think what's happening now, more and more people who have their jobs on the line are speaking out. You know, I'm not taking any credit. Dean gave me too much credit earlier, I think. But I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired, you know. I mean, I saw young people whose lives were this wiped out because they were sent to prison in a situation that, in my opinion, it just, you know, it should not have taken place. We know the history of the so-called war on drugs and how ineffective it was, and it still is. But we just can't afford, our society can't afford to keep doing what we've been doing. We just got to do something different. We've got to change this thing. And the way we can do it is what we suggest through L.E.A.P, and that is eliminate the constraints, take control. You know, I mean, the gentleman earlier talked about tobacco and alcohol usage. Well, tobacco is not being brewed up in a bathtub somewhere, and neither is alcohol. You see what I'm saying?
Well, it used to be when it was illegal.
That's exactly right, and that's what's happening in the drug market. And anytime you put a prohibition on anything, the cost goes up, which makes it economically feasible for bad stuff to happen. So we got to change that.
Yeah. I was just reading a book from the recently retired chief of the Seattle Police Force. I believe his name is Stromer or something like that. And he devoted some time in his book to the insanity of the current drug laws. It's just amazing the number of high-ranking and responsible police officers that are coming out and saying that.
Well, they are the ones that work day to day with the insanity that exists out there, and they see that it's not working. And I think they feel like many of us in L.E.A.P, all of us in L.E.A.P do, is that we have to change that and start doing something different, because we cannot continue to do the same thing. So I think they realize that, it's taking its toll on the greatest natural resources that we have, our young people, you see. And I think that, they see that something has to happen.
Well, I know back when Ann Richards was governor in Texas, the legislature authorized a fairly substantial budget to put drug rehabilitation beds in the prison system, and that ultimately something less than half of those were actually funded.
Well, I tell you, Governor Richards is one of my heroes. She took a bold stand and had this state continue on the direction that she had started. We'd be much better now. But the unfortunate thing is that when she was out of office, those drug treatment centers ended up being prisons.
Yeah.
And that was not what they were intended to do. So instead of it being an asset to our state, it became a liability.
Right. Well, we just recently had another change in the state jail felonies, which under some conditions mandated probation for low-level drug offenses. Does that seem to be working, or is that going the same way?
It's going to go the same way. I hate to be pessimistic, but until there's a complete revamping of the criminal justice system in the process, you put people on probation, you set them up to fail.
Well, I know I have heard stories that at least in Harris County, the probation system is designed to set them up to fail, not to help them get through.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I've heard other places that probation actually does work with people to move them along.
The reality is that based upon leadership under those various units, if you have supervisors of probation officers who are professional and recognize what probation is intended to do, then you have some successes. But if you don't, then, like you say, these folks are just being set up to fail.
Well, I think there's something else, too. We see numbers suggesting that our probation officers have 2 to 3 times the caseload they should be having.
That's right.
And it doesn't take too long to write up a motion to bust a guy for failing a drug test.
That's right.
But it takes a lot of work to work with him and get him straightened out and work through the system.
That's right.
Is this just another case of our pouring the money down the wrong rat hole?
That's exactly what it is. And there are opportunities that we have that if we do what we can to help facilitate people staying in society, working. A lot of people who come to prison, they have jobs, they have families, you know, and they pay taxes, you see. But when their probation is revoked, they're sent to prison, then instead of being an asset out there, they're a liability.
Well, I think that if you take someone who has a job and who's sent to prison, then not only is he no longer a taxpayer,
right.
and he's costing us, $30,000 a year now?
That's
His wife and his kids are
right.
now
That's right.
a public burden,
Yeah.
and his children are growing up under circumstances where they're likely to be problems too.
That's exactly right. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, but we're just about up to our break time. So in a few seconds, we'll take a break and come back and continue this discussion in about another minute. But let's see what we have to say tonight.
It's time to play Name That Drug by its side effects. Constipation, diarrhea, dizziness, drowsiness, itching, hair loss, sweating, swelling, thirst, vertigo, inflammation of the lung, kidney disease, congestive heart failure, and headaches. Time's up. The answer, Aleve for headaches.
This week in drug war history, October 14th, 1970. President Nixon spearheads the Controlled Substances Act, legislation establishing today's schedules as a means of classifying drugs strictly by their medical value and potential for abuse. October 14, 2003, Supreme Court justices reject the Clinton administration's request, continued by the Bush administration, to consider whether the federal government can punish doctors for recommending or even discussing the use of marijuana for their patients. October 15, 1986, Assistant Attorney General Mark Richard testifies before the Kerry Committee that he had attended a meeting with 20 to 25 officials and that the DEA did not want to provide any of the information the committee had requested on the Contra involvement in drug trafficking. October 17, 2002, Florida Governor Jeb Bush's daughter is sentenced to 10 days in jail and led away in handcuffs after being accused of having crack cocaine in her shoe while in drug rehab. October 20th, 2004, a groundbreaking coalition of black professional organizations come together to form the National African American Drug Policy Coalition. They urgently seek alternatives to misguided drug policies that have led to mass incarceration. This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
Okay, let's pick up just briefly on a couple of things that were in that little break. One is most of us, for very good a reason, vilify Richard Nixon. He normally goes down as one of history's really bad guys.
Right.
But interestingly enough, as he put his drug policy into effect, his drug policy was the one that viewed it as a tripod with three legs, the three being rehabilitation or therapy, as well as enforcement and source suppression. And he's the only one that ever treated those three equally. His first drug czar, although it wasn't officially that at the time, was actually a doctor who had been pioneering in methadone therapy. Methadone therapy got its start under Nixon. And since then, we seem to have kicked that leg entirely out from under the tripod.
Unfortunately, that happens. As an example with Governor Richards, when she came up with her treatment centers, and they, along the way, became prisons. The same thing happened, I think, with President Nixon. What happens, I think, is that we lose sight of reality. Politics play its role. It rears its ugly head, special interest and that type of thing. But I really feel that this nation has to recognize that, you know, what's a liability to one segment of our society is a liability to the whole society, and that until we start dealing with these issues, you know, we're going to continue to go in that negative direction. So we have to look at as an example, we came up with an idea. What if we took a prison, a Texas prison, any prison, say a 2,000-bed facility, and we get one of these companies that want to go to China, move their business to China because they got cheap labor and all of that. And we give them, say, a 50-year lease on 25 or 30 acres of land adjacent to that prison unit. And what we do is we come up with an agreement. Say, okay, business, what we will do is we will supply you cheap labor. If you do several things for us, first of all, you will help us train these persons who are incarcerated in their specific jobs. And if they do a good job, when their time comes for release, try to find them a place in a company that you have in some other part of the state of the world, okay? At the same time, what we will do, we will provide them with counseling and training. So many of the people who are incarcerated have never been responsible for themselves.
Right.
You see, they've never had a job.
Right.
They've never had to get up at a certain time. They've never had to be responsible for themselves. Many of them come with all kinds of baggage. They need anger management, and they need just basic counseling. So if we'll provide these services and you'll work with us, and when they're released, do what you can to help provide them with a job. But whatever happens, they're going to be a marketable, productive opportunity for our society. So, we're going to have to, that's just one of the far-fetched ideas. We're going to have to look at those kinds of things.
I believe a couple of states have tried similar things.
They have.
I know.
They have.
I know Oregon turns out clothing, and one of the Midwestern states has a program very much like that.
Right.
These seem to be successful.
Well, an integral part of that is it has to be something that looks at the human aspect of these folks. See, these are human beings, but, Texas has this hang 'em high mentality where, you lock them all up and throw the key away. Well, it's become economically not feasible now. You can't keep locking up people for minor drug. So many of these folks who are locked up for minor drug offenses are related offenses due to that substance problem. So it has to be a holistic approach taken, and that's the only way. See, it was my intent in my lifetime to try to work myself out of a job where they would actually, when I retired, they would actually close that prison down and make a substance abuse center out of it or something, you see. So these are the kinds of things that I think we're going to have to look at and have to take a bold stand on, like Governor Richards did.
Well, if you take a guy, then most of the problem is still with males.
Right.
Who dropped out of school. From the time he's 13, he's been hanging around on the street corner. He's been selling a little bit of crack off and on. He gets busted when he's 19, gets 12 to 15 years in prison. He gets out in his middle 30s. He hadn't seen the world at all for 15 years, and he'd been hanging on the street.
Yeah.
You unlock the door, you put him out, and you wave bye-bye. What's he going to do?
That is the real bottom line here, is that we cannot take a human being who's had a similar kind of history and lock them up for any period of time and put them back on the streets and expect them to be a productive citizen. It just doesn't work that way. See, what has happened, I think, in Texas, the reason why we've just given the prison system just whatever they wanted for so many years is that there was an illusion that you could lock people up and throw the key away. The real thing is that nearly a greater percentage of the people who are locked up don't just fall off the face of Texas. They eventually get out and they come back to your neighborhood and my neighborhood. So who do we want coming back to our neighborhoods? Do we want an individual who has had an opportunity to establish some responsibility in their lives, to alter their lives, stay connected to reality in life? The Shawshank Redemption, I don't know if you saw that movie where this guy was so institutionalized until he thought he still had to ask to go to the bathroom. So those kinds of things really exist. You lock somebody up in this day and time for 10 years, and when they come back, it's totally a different world. So I think so many people are recognizing that we can't just lock folks up and throw the key away. We have to do something constructive so that when they come back, they'll come back.
I believe we have a caller. Caller, you're on the air.
Actually, yes. Pretty much a living experience of what you're just talking about, how the young man goes to jail when he's 19, on and off for various drug crimes. I'm going through that right now with my husband. He got sentenced to 15 years, and we have a small child. He just turned 1. He's been in a TDC for about a year now, and he's up for parole next year. Now, I don't want to give false hope that he's going to make it because he got a 15-year sentence, and all the lawyers are telling us it's impossible for someone with a drug crime in Texas to get paroled, and 2 years on a 15-year sentence. Now, someone in my situation, who do we turn to for advice or to make I looked on the website, parole, I mean, he's trying to do better and change his life in there, but now most people are like, oh, well, he made that decision, lock up, throw away the key, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, what advice would you have for someone in my position? How do you have, I know it's up to the parole board, but do I go through parole lawyers or, what advice do I throw him in there? And he's like, because 15 years is a very long time. It's not an aggravated, but it is 15 years.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to point out that here's a 1-year-old baby that has gotten a prison sentence.
That's exactly right.
And a mother who needs some way to support herself and the baby. But other than that, what would you say?
I would suggest to this lady, ma'am, if you would, the next time you go to visit your husband, I don't know where he is, but when you go to visit him, during visitation, the prison units are required to put families, it's called TIPA, that's the acronym, that these are families of offenders who actually have come up with ways to help themselves. And there's a chapter in nearly every major city, and I know there's at least one in Houston because we've been down to their conventions. That's one of the first things that I would suggest you do, because these are folks who've had experiences, who've helped each other negotiate their way through all kinds of challenges based upon their loved one being locked up. And that's my best advice to you, is to hook up with someone who's had experience similar, identical almost to what you've had.
Now, I would also say that there are parole lawyers.
Right.
It wouldn't hurt to talk to one of them.
Right.
But one other thing I would, at one time, and this I think was a result of some of the problems from the 1940s and 50s, at one time the Texas prison system had a pretty good educational plan. Its own private school district, a lot of access to other things. From what I hear, this seems to have gone away.
Well, the unfortunate thing, and that's true, the Wyndham School District is the official school district of the Texas prison system. They have a wonderful history of helping people help themselves. I think Dr. George Bedo, who was a professor at Sam Houston State,
and he was the head of the criminal justice system.
That's right, for a long time. There were others as well who put a tremendous. They recognized that if you have an incarceree and you turn them out with less tools than they have when they got there, then chances are you'd see them again. Yeah. So that Wyndham School District is still a great program, but the unfortunate thing is that the population outgrew the ability that the school district had to accommodate those folks.
I think at one time, wasn't it even the goal that everyone should have an opportunity at least to get a GED?
That's exactly right. But right now, everybody's taking cuts. The budget has been cut. Wyndham, for a long time, was not cut. But from what I understand, they've been cut as well. But the real challenge comes with such an expansion in population with the same ability to try to accommodate more people.
When you're talking about the budget being cut, the last figures I really remember from about 2 years ago, the Texas prison system was costing about $2.5 billion a year.
It's about $3 billion. Yeah. It's about $3 billion. Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money, and as we alluded to earlier, is that so much of that money is really counterproductive, because what happens is that there seems to be an idea of rehabilitation. In my opinion, there is no such thing in the Texas prison system as rehabilitation, because so many people who get there have not been habilitated to start with.
Right.
You see? So you can't rehabilitate somebody. You have to provide an environment that will go back to the basics. and the basics thing is, I mean, we have so many people, and I read an article, I think in the Chronicle either today or yesterday, that talked about people being ruder now. And it comes from, and it's going to get worse because the family unit, both parents work, and then a lot of people come from a single-parent home, and kids are pretty much at will, and then they see bad behavior on the father's part when somebody cut him off, you know, and then they see bad behavior on the mother's part when she cut somebody off in traffic. So this is the kind of environment that exists.
Well, yeah, and when you talk about people that don't even know the basics, you're not really talking about reading and writing and arithmetic here. You're talking about brushing your teeth, and that you smell bad if you don't bathe occasionally, and
basics.
If you're going to have to go to a job, you have to be there on time.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right. I think you know, so many things. History repeats itself. That was one of the auto companies who years ago started hiring a lot of people out of the inner city, and they really made a concerted effort to put folks back to work and to put folks to work who didn't traditionally have jobs. And they ended up firing about half of them within a few days because they didn't come to work. Well, when they researched, they found that those folks didn't have alarm clocks. So what they did is they bought them alarm clocks, and they gave them some basic kind of training, and many of them made excellent employees.
Well, 150 years ago, as the factory system were just starting out, factories would install big steam whistles in the town, and there would be one at 6 o'clock in the morning that said, get up, one at 8 that said, be at work, the noon whistle. So it looks like we're having to go back and relearn some lessons from a long time ago.
That's exactly right. The prison system, they had their whistles. I remember the prison unit. As a kid growing up in Huntsville, I'd hear those whistles blow. You know, we knew what time it was. But, basic stuff, we've gotten away from it, and we just, we got to go back to basics. It's basically what has to happen.
Well, we hear about fragmented families and families without fathers in them, but what I keep hearing and seeing is kids basically that are out on their own completely by the time they're 10 to 13 years old. And I mean, that's about as fractured as a family can get.
I've seen horror stories where part of my job as a prison warden was to interview as many offenders as I possibly could upon receiving them on a unit. And we tried to be holistic in our approach, in that we dealt with not only their criminal background, but their medical and psychological background. And many times we would take time and to talk to these folks about their kind of family environments, you know, where they came from. And many of them admitted that, you know, they've been on, the ones that appeared to be so hard were those that was a challenge. They were a challenge to me because I just wanted to try to find out what made them tick. And nearly 100% of the time, those are the guys that had been on their homes at a very early age, and they had just grown to be so tough. And I mean, it was just a bad situation, horrible.
Yeah. Well, I have also heard from many places that large numbers of people in serious trouble and people that have serious substance problems come from abusive backgrounds.
They do. As we know, it's a vicious cycle. And so many of the folks have been abused in one way or the other. And I had no idea until I got involved in the prison profession that, you know, how many people have been abused. And there's so many forms of abuse. And but it all takes its toll. And it's a challenge for those folks to get over it. But fortunately, there are a few programs. There's a program, a volunteer program. These are ex-offenders called the Winner Circle. And these are folks who have had, I mean, I have just been at the point of tears listening to their life stories. But what they have done through various things, and primarily through faith, they have gotten their act together, and they have devoted their lives to helping other folks. And these are the folks that can come into a unit and can talk to these guys and tell them, hey, look, I know what I'm talking about because I've sat where you were sitting, you know, and I've been where you've been. And but what's going to happen is that we're going to have to increase those kinds of things. And fortunately, the prison system hired a lady who had been a previous warden, who was an attorney, who ran a substance abuse center, and put her in charge of those kinds of programs. Madeline Ortiz, she's doing an excellent job. And so there is a little light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, one thing I've noticed over the years with some amusement is that occasionally a strange duck gets caught up in the prison system, and we have someone from a life of luxury and power like a Chuck Colson or a Martha Stewart who gets caught up in the gears. And Colson came out and started his prison ministries and has been fairly effective in reform efforts. And I've noticed in the short time she's been out, even Martha has made some sounds along that way. Maybe should we hope that, say, Karl Rove should do a little time in and come out?
It's an humbling experience, and there's some wonderful stories that come out of prison. We have, at our church, we've used ex-offender who has a mission now of spreading the truth and through music. Wonderful thing. I mean, he's just a wonderful spirit. So,
yeah. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, Mr. Watkins. This is Ms. Perez calling. I wanted to ask you a question. I'm a minority mom. I have a son that's in the East Ham unit.
Okay.
And I've been kicking around the idea with an ex-parole officer of opening up an employment agency for parolees and probationers that don't know how to get out there and get themselves a job. I wanted to see what your take is on that. By the way, I think you do a wonderful job. I just wish they had some people like you at the East Ham unit, which really sucks, but I don't want to get into that. But anyway, it is something that I am kicking around for minorities, because a lot of minority people, whether they're black or Hispanic, they don't get their chance. And I've got a son that's got an 18-year sentence that's already been 11 years, so. And the way the gang situation is in there, I really don't know what's going to happen, but I think that these parolees are right. They don't get enough education inside to be educated outside. So can you give me your feel on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perez.
Yeah.
There are people who are doing exactly what you're talking about right now. There's a group in Dallas, Ms. Brown, I can't remember her first name. She was convicted falsely. Spent 12 years in prison in Gatesville. And when she got out, she made it her life's mission to help other offenders, because she recognized that any offender, anybody who's been convicted and sent to prison in Texas, has an X on his or her back when they get out. And what she's doing is she is working with companies and corporations, providing training for those ex-offenders and getting them jobs and monitoring them and working with them and training. So your idea, Ms. Perez, is an outstanding idea, and it's happening on a large level and it's happening on a small level. As a matter of fact, we've had churches to adopt a member of their church who had gone to prison, adopt them when they got out, worked with them, found them a job, gave them a place to stay until they got on their feet. So, yes, ma'am, what you're talking about is where the rubber meets the road and where the real difference is going to be made on a one-by-one case.
Oh, I was just thinking, in the federal system, they put a big emphasis on halfway houses, and a halfway house release is normally part of the release process. So the state really doesn't have anything equivalent. One problem I hear is that particularly coming out with no job, finding a place to live is impossible.
It is.
It really looks like that this is a great opportunity for citizen democracy to take over right at the point where that gate opens up. Employment's a good part of it. One thing, because an employment agency, if it works, can be self-funding and even show a profit.
Sure.
But it's more than that.
It is. It's really helping people to help society, which helps us all. the more people we can get back on the employment rolls, the more people we can get back to their families, taking care of their kids, paying their bills, being there for them in times of challenge, the better off we all are going to be.
If there were jobs available when people walked out, what would happen to the recidivism rate in the Texas prisons?
It would drop. First of all, it would drop in that people feel good. Offenders feel good, and I've seen it time and time again where they feel good when they're doing something for themselves and they're doing something for other people, to include their own families. So recidivism is going to drop because there's no need for them to recycle themselves back in the prison when they feel good about themselves being out.
Well, I was just thinking that when we meet each other at a dinner party or a cocktail party, about the first thing you ask someone is, what do you do?
That's right.
And if all you can say is, I hang out on the street corner, you don't feel very good about it.
Well, the real impact comes, I think, on an individual basis when an individual don't feel good about themselves, and you can't feel good about yourself when you're not contributing to your own support. Even, the welfare system has proven that. It was gone beyond what it was designed to do. So, it's just when people can do something positive and constructive, then they'll feel good about themselves, and then they'll feel good about others.
Okay, we're about to run out of time. I've got one little announcement to make, and then I'll let you sum up what you want to say. The Houston Normal's having their monthly meeting on October the 26th at 7:30 at the West Gray Cafe at 415 West Gray in Houston. So those of you interested in attending the Normal meeting, that will be on the 26th at 7:30 at the West Gray Cafe. Okay. Well, if you were in charge of the world, where would you go with and let's call it correction system, for want of a better word?
Well, I would work toward eliminating it. That's the first thing that I would do. I know this is, really far-fetched. I don't have all the answers, but I have some suggestions, and that is that we're going to have to start looking at these folks as human beings. They're not just criminals. They're your neighbors and my neighbors and my nephew, your cousin. They're human beings, and when the system recognizes that these are human beings who are not going to just die and fall off the face of the earth, they're going to have to be treated like human beings and held responsible for their actions and provided assistance in helping them help themselves.
Okay. I recently ran into a quotation from Justice Breyer on the Supreme Court, where he talked about effective democracy as that bubbles up from the bottom, which means that if people want to see changes made, it's up to them to bubble up. The best way to do that is by letters or visits or even phone calls to their elected representatives. You're their bosses. You're the ones they listen to if you make it persistent enough. So if you want change, talk to them and come back and see us again in another 2 weeks. Thank you.
The present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is a less dangerous drug.
We're going full-blown into a program that has failed and failed every other time we tried it. Please point out one success in 30 years of an eradication program that has stopped drugs from coming in this country. Point out one success, because I've reviewed that research and there is none.
Run!